So good afternoon, everybody who's joining us just now. We'll just give everybody a couple of minutes to join at the end of the school day. So hi, everyone who's joining. Hope you're getting comfy, getting a cup of tea. Really nice to have you with us today. Right, so just while we're waiting for a few colleagues to join, I'll just make a start with a few intros and a bit of housekeeping. So a really warm welcome to everyone joining today. Thank you for coming to our revision webinar with Ian. So I'm Katie and I'm the Secondary Publishing Director at Collins. And we've got the fantastic Ian Davies here, who is the Head of Learning at White Rose Maths, as I'm sure you know, and he's the series editor for our new GCSE revision guides. So Ian is going to explore how you can build confidence, deepen understanding, and provide your students with plenty of practice opportunities for GCSE Maths, for AQA, and for Edexcel. So Ian's presentation, we think, will be about 30 minutes or so. We'll have plenty of time for Q&As at the end, so please do pop any questions you have in the chat, and we'll make sure we'll come back to them. The session's being recorded as well, so please do share with your colleagues if they're not able to make it, and spread the word. And without any further ado, I think I'll hand over to Ian to get started.
Thank you very much, Katie, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome indeed to this short presentation on the latest collaboration between Collins and White Rose Maths, which are our GCSE guides. So what I'll be looking at this afternoon, firstly, I'll give a quick overview of the series, telling you how it's structured and what it's got in it. I'll be focusing particularly on what's different, why this is a slightly different approach to revision than perhaps you've seen before in some other revision guides. We look in depth inside one of the chapters, one of the sections of one of the revision guides, to just give you a clear idea of exactly what it is that these revision guides offer. I'll be answering some frequently asked questions, probably as I go along, but I've also got a little list at the end as well. And then I shall talk about next steps if you're interested in purchasing the guides, and take any questions. So as Katie said, if you've got any questions as I'm talking, if anything occurs to you, you want to know more about, then please just do type into the chat or into the Q&A, and I will answer those questions at the end. Okay. So first of all, an overview of this revision guides project. What we have is a series of GCSE revision guides that are tailored to 3 different levels of attainment. So rather than the usual 2 foundation higher, we split it into 3 different levels, and I'll give a little bit more detail about that as we look inside each of the books. Yeah, it's produced by White Rose, so it fits perfectly alongside the White Rose secondary schemes of learning, but it doesn't have to be used with the White Rose scheme. It's GCSE, it covers the whole of GCSE, not IGCSE, but the standard GCSE that nearly everyone in state schools sits. And so whatever curriculum you're following, whatever materials you're using to support that, you'll be able to use these guides to help with your students' revision. Because it's White Rose, it's particularly built on our mastery approach to teaching and learning. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we look at some examples of the content inside the book. And as Katie mentioned, there are specific versions available to suit both Edexcel and AQA examination boards. But as it is GCSE content, and it's essentially the same content for any board, you could use that as well to support any other GCSE qualification that you are following. Within the particular Edexcel and AQA versions, we've looked at how they ask questions in those boards, and we've tailored it more towards their sort of language. But in terms of the actual maths content, it's suitable for any examination board at all. Okay, so what's different about the White Rose revision guides compared to other revision guides that you may already have seen or ones you've been using for a while? Well, one of the first things we thought about when we were designing the revision guides and thinking about how we wanted them to appear is that we wanted to have a very, very clean presentation that would help students to access the maths. Quite often when you look at some revision guides, there's a top tip here, there's an examiner feedback section here, don't forget tips and tricks, blah, 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 blah. There's so much going on the screen or on the page rather, but you actually lose sight of the maths. What is it that the students are meant to be revising? What are they meant to be doing? When I was researching other guides before writing ours, I saw one, there was 6 top tips on one page, and it makes you wonder, what is a top tip if you can have 6 on every page in the book? So yeah, we haven't done any of that. We've made it just a nice, clean presentation with clear worked examples, something to remind the students, something to help them to revise, to revisit the material that they should be familiar with, but plenty of clear worked examples, and then plenty of practice for them to get on to really get those skills under their belt as well. So it's not a lot of fluff and then a very little bit of maths, but really maths is the center of the guides, everything that the students need to understand and to be able to do to perform well in their GCSEs. We've also differentiated the questions within each of the guides as well. So as well as differentiated levels of the guides themselves, we've differentiated to provide opportunities for fluency, just practicing that basic skill. What is this about? And then also fulfilling the needs of the national curriculum and GCSE specifications, questions that develop reasoning and problem solving as well. So hopefully students will be prepared for anything that they might see in their GCSEs. Another thing that's really different is that we've gone for 3 levels of revision guide. Usually you'll see a foundation guide that covers grades 1 to 5 and a higher guide that covers grades 4 to 9. And the issue with that is quite often a lot of students either don't need quite a lot of the book that they've got, or a lot of the book they've got is not accessible to them. So instead, we've targeted our revision guides at the sorts of grades that students may be aiming for. So the first guide is aiming for a 4, and it's just that we're looking at getting that standard pass in mathematics. So everything you need to know for grade 1, 2, 3 and 4. Nobody tries to aim for less than the 4, everyone's trying to pass. So we've got enough material in there to make sure that anyone who can cover everything in this book will get that solid grade 4 that's so important for students to move on to their next level of education. The next book we have then is aiming for grades 5 and 6. And it's that middle ground, I think, that often misses out in a lot of current revision guides. If you're aiming for, say, a grade 6 and you get a higher GCSE revision guide, quite a lot of that material is going to be inaccessible for you. Similarly, if you're going for a grade 5, a lot of the foundation material in the foundation revision guide might be far too easy for you. So aiming for grade 5 and 6 really focuses in on those key things that will help those students who are aiming for those 2 grades. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about which topics as we look inside each guide shortly. Finally, then, we've got aiming for a 7, 8, 9. So for those students who are really going for the top grades, this really focuses in on exactly what it is that they need to know to make sure that they can tip over into those top grades and be ready to go on and study maths further, probably at A level if you're aiming for one of those grades. Okay, now throughout any of these, we've got a mastery approach, the same as we have throughout White Rose Maths in all our materials. So we're looking at that concrete pictorial abstract approach first of all. So you will see some pictures of concrete materials and things like bar models that represent abstract things like algebraic notation in there. So we have that because it'll be familiar models and representations to students, particularly if they're following the Right Rose scheme, but even if they're not, it's something that helps them to make sense of the maths. And that's why we use so much of that throughout our Key Stage 3 textbooks and throughout our White Rose plans and resources. We're looking at teaching for understanding. And I've put teaching in inverted commas there. Obviously, this is a revision guide, so we're revising. We're not teaching things for the first time, but we are providing, detailed explanations of what is required, what we want the students to be able to do. And again, it's about helping them to understand the mathematics rather than try and put so many tips and tricks and things that they have to remember. It's not about a memory test. It's about revisiting these things, understanding these things, knowing how and when to apply their mathematics in their examinations at the end of the course. We've also included, where appropriate, the mastery element that we call variation. So keeping one thing the same and varying something else so you can see what's the same and what's different. And again, help you to understand that mathematics. When we're revising, we want to be able to understand it and then to be able to answer questions on it. And we're using variation where that's appropriate. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. We are going to start looking inside the guides now. So let's start by looking inside the first one, which is aiming for a 4. So within this guide, what we've done is we've picked out 55 key topics in mathematics. We've arranged them over 5 key areas. These are the ones that we think students really need to know to be able to access what they need at foundation tier and get that grade 4. There's absolutely no higher tier content in this guide at all. It's a focus on the basics, so students can look at this book and not think, oh my goodness, there's so much of this that I cannot do. It's emphasizing what they can do so that they will be ready to get that grade 4. Within that, those 55 key topics, there's a double page spread for each topic, and we'll have a look at one of those shortly. Okay, so again, here's how it's set out. We have this big contents page here. These are the 55 areas that we'll be looking at, split into the sections of number, algebra, ratio, geometry measure, and probability and statistics. If I just zoom in on one of those, because I don't expect you to be able to read those, but there's the algebra section, for example, and you can see you've got things there like solving linear equations, not extremely difficult ones, but ones you'd need to get a grade 4. Similarly, we've got some inequalities, etc. So each of these topics will have its own double page, and let's have a look at one of those double pages now so you can see how we're supporting that understanding and that building of confidence that Katie was talking about earlier. So here's the double page for brackets and factors, and every other double page is set out in the same way. You've got some facts, what the topic is about, focus, some work examples, some fluency, some easier questions to see that students have got the basics of this particular topic and then taking it further. And we'll look at all 4 of those in a little bit more detail. So here's the facts section from that part of the book there. And as you can see, we're using and explaining the key language that students need to understand to be able to answer examination questions. So multiplying out a single bracket, that's the same as the word expand. We talk about what we mean instead by expand and simplify. We talk about factorize, and we talk about factorizing fully. So within this facts section, it tells the student everything that this topic is about. It reminds them of the things that we hopefully, they should know something about, but just to re-familiarize with themselves. A lot of students can multiply out a bracket, but they're faced with the word expand, they don't know what that means. So that's why we have that facts section, to make sure they know what it is that's expected of them and to help them to understand the mathematics. As I indicated earlier, now, this is a very white rose approach. So it's not just this is what you do. It's not just the procedures, but there's some explanations of the procedures as well. And we use pictures to help understanding. So like we were on the left here, we've got an area model. We've got algebra tiles as well, showing how these can be used to aid with expanding and factorizing a single bracket. Okay. Then we get onto the focus section, and the focus section, it's not just one example. We've got 3 examples. In this case, in most sections, there's 2 or 3 examples to make sure we're covering everything again that students will need to know in order to succeed. Help build their confidence by seeing how it's done. You'll notice also that it's not just examples, but you've got this commentary on the right-hand side as well that explains how this mathematics is done. So after each line on the right there is explaining what happens. We're talking here about the HCF, the highest common factor. That's explained back in the facts section, that terminology. So again, even when we're looking at different topics, we're interleaving, as we do in White Rose Maths, we mix those topics up so students are aware of where topics and vocabulary appears in different areas of mathematics. Okay, so after those examples, which take you from straightforward expanding and simplifying through factorizing and more complex factorizing, we then get some fluency questions. And it's in here you're more likely to see the variation that I was talking about earlier on. So if you look at that top line there, that question 1, 3x plus 3, 3x minus 3, 3 minus x. What's the same? What's different? Something, if you were doing this in class, you could discuss with students the similarities and the differences between these questions, or something that they might spot themselves as well. Where necessary, because you don't necessarily work through a revision guide in order, you might well pick out the topics that you're interested. We've got little hints or reminders in blue boxes as well, just to help students along there. So then that first one where you have to expand, where there's going to be an x squared term, that's explained for the students there. And generally, hopefully you can see you've had some time to have a little look at that page. You can see that there is a progression throughout those fluency questions. So we're starting with the very basic and getting a little bit harder and looking at all the aspects of this topic, expanding a single bracket and factorizing into a single bracket as well. Okay, so moving on then, the final section that you have on each double thread is this section that we call further, which, as the name suggests, just takes that topic a little bit further, adds a little bit of greater challenge to the students. So if the fluency questions were more grade 1, 2, then we're getting into perhaps the grade 3, 4 questions in here. They're more exam-like as well in the way that they are phrased, in the way that they appear, and there's an indication of the marks that these might be worth in an exam. Okay, so again, just to build that confidence, think, oh, I could get 2 or 3 marks for this, etc. And you can see the sort of thing that we're doing here as well. There's more of that interleaving, more of what you'd expect in an exam, where it's not just about expanding and simplifying, but it's putting it into different contexts. And here we're putting it into the context of shape as well. Okay, for each of these sections as well, you do get the answers. The answers are provided at the back. This is an answer to the 2.1. That was section 2.3, I think. You get full answers to the fluency, and for the further, where you need some development, the developed solutions are shown there as well. So answers are provided too. Let's look a little bit further now, then let's take it into the grade 5-6 booklet. The same idea really works here. What we do though, is we don't assume that because a student is aiming for 5-6, they know absolutely everything about the stuff that's grade 1 to 4. So we have some review of earlier topics at the start of each section. So at the start of number, the start of algebra, at the start of geometry and measure, etc. You've got some review of the material that was covered in the aiming for a 4 book. So it's a similar size. We end up with 56 sections this time, 45 key topics, and 11 of those reviews. And I'll show you one of those in a moment. But what we also have is some selected higher content this time. When you've got a student who's aiming for a grade 5 and 6, there are certain topics that you are unlikely to cover with them in terms of getting them prepared for their GCSE. So we're really focusing on things like cumulative frequency that you would expect a grade 5-6 student to be able to access, but not including perhaps things like hard search questions or iteration or something like that. The format, however, is exactly the same as the aiming for a 4 with those double pages, but they've got an added foundation section as well, which I'll show you in a second. So at the beginning of each one, so this is at the beginning of the geometry and measure section, we have this recap of things that they should already know. Just because they're aiming for 5 and 6, they need to have some confidence with that earlier, easier stuff as well. So a reminder of what's covered in detail in the first section. So things like algebraic angles notation, 3-letter notation, how we use hatch marks, etc., what the rules are for angles. And as well as that, it's not just a big list. We do provide some practice for that material as well. So practice questions on the basic bread and butter stuff that you're pretty confident that this student who's aiming for a 5 and 6 will be able to do, but they may need a little reminder of it. So plenty of practice again, even of the material that isn't the focus of the book. After that, then we go into topics that are more appropriate for 5-6. So we're looking at loci and simple loci. And you can see that before the facts section, we have this foundations. That foundations might be a reminder of something that's in the aiming for a 4 book, something that's slightly easier, or in this case, it's a reminder of the chapter before. So in order to be able to do loci, you need to be able to construct bisectors, angle bisectors, and perpendicular bisectors. So a little reminder there in the foundations. You can look back into the other section if they need to revise that. There is also a full index. So if they come to this and they're looking up loci and it says angle bisector, you can look up in the index angle bisector and it'll tell them to go to section 4.1 in order to do that. Then we have facts about loci, explaining what the word locus means, explaining about the word equidistant, etc. And again, some focus examples, some works examples with this commentary telling them what exactly they need to do. That's example 1 there. There is another example before we get to the fluency section. And again, the fluency section is just, do you get this bit? Can you do this particular thing without trying to put it into anything too complicated to start with? They will need, it's not a write-in booklet, so they will need some paper in order to do this. So things like constructing loci, and that's explained in the front as a little section about how to use the book for students as well. So if they used it independently rather than guided by a teacher, you'll be able to see that. And in the same way, then further, some more exam-like questions that are slightly more complicated. So put into a more real-life situation, looking at solving those loci questions. Finally, then, inside the 7, 8, 9, you've got the idea by now. It's exactly the same format as the other guides. It's a tiny bit shorter. There's 41 key topics and 9 reviews. And here we have the remaining higher content that students will need in order to access those real top grades. Again, you've still got those review sections. So, even if you aim for a 7 and 8, 9, it doesn't mean you've remembered absolutely everything that you've ever done before. So there's those reminders, those foundation sections that talk you through key things you need to know. This is the one about number, and again, plenty of practice questions for that as well, both calculator and non-calculator, by the way. And that's something that we've emphasized throughout the guides. There's lots of things on how to use a calculator. We've borne in mind 2/3 of GCSE is calculator allowed. So, those skills of using calculators are important, and we reference those throughout these guides. Then, so we're into 7, 8, 9 now, so we'll have more complicated topics. So if we're looking at surds, the foundations, well, you need to understand factors, you need to understand square numbers, etc., in order to be able to do that. Then exactly the same way, you've got facts, how surds work, what rationalizing the denominator means, your focus, where you've got some examples of simplifying, multiplying out, then moving on to the more complicated rationalizing the denominator, including even proper grade 9 sort of questions like that. And then notice again a reference to the calculator there. Then you've got your fluency question, looking at some more straightforward surd questions. And finally, into your further section, where we're looking at bit more complex questions and also applying these skills in different areas. So linking to Pythagoras' theorem, linking to area volume, linking to geometric sequences, etc. Okay, so the same thing then happens throughout the 7, 8, 9 as it does in aiming for a 4, 5, 6. We have that White Roads approach. Here's a section from the completing the square where you're using algebra class to explain how that works. Okay, so it's not just, here's some facts, here's some tricks, but little reminders of this material for students. There's also complete coverage. We don't leave out anything. So I've mentioned iteration a couple of times. So we cover iteration, how it works, sign change, rearranging formulas, what you need to do. We have more than one example. This is example 1 for that. And again, you can see we're showing students how to use their calculator for this as well. So rather than just assuming they'll be able to do that, we've got that, suggestion of how you might need to press the right buttons in order to be able to access and do this particular skill. Same way then, fluency questions and further questions, raising the challenge, and all of them again do have the answers provided. So, the lists of the iterations in there in the fluency, and the explanations, the wordy bits that you do need as well for the further, more challenging questions. Okay, so some frequently asked questions, some things I think people would want to know about this. Are they for use in class or at home? And again, that choice is entirely up to you. I can see this working either way. If you've got a class that's mainly aiming for a 4, but 1 or 2 students are working for a 5, 6, then you might want that student to have the 5, 6 to support them. Or it might be something, that because there is a lot of practice, you could do a revision lesson based on one of these things, one of these topics, and deliver that yourself in class as well. So whichever you like, really. Do you have to be using the White Rose secondary schemes of learning? I've already said that that's not the case. They tie in, they use some familiar images from there, but it's all about GCSE mathematics. So that should be perfectly acceptable, whatever scheme of learning you're following at Key Stage 3 and at Key Stage 4. Which exam boards can they be used with? Well, they're written specifically with an AQA and an Edexcel version. However, the content of GCSE is the same. So although the phrasing and the look of some questions might be slightly different, you can use these with any students following any exam boards GCSE. Which book should I buy? Well, again, you know your students far better than anybody outside of your classroom does. So you know what grade it is they're looking at. Maybe for some students, they're working sort of for that 5, 6, but you want them to really make sure they've got their basics, and they need to have that aiming for a 4 so they can do that at home and get that basic stuff done, so you can really focus them on the 5 and 6 stuff that you are teaching to them. Maybe for others, it is the 5 and 6 that they need more and more practice with. They're okay with those basics. So it's, it's thinking about really each individual student, which one is going to suit the needs of those students. If you've only got a small number of students that are doing 7, 8, and 9, then perhaps the 7, 8, and 9 would be very helpful for them to reach up for those higher target grades. Can they be used as a key stage for textbook? Well, the short answer to that one is no. The slightly longer answer is we have got quite a lot of material in there. We've got practice for each section, as you've seen, and it does take it further. However, I don't think there would be quite enough to make it work as a textbook, and that's not what it's designed at. It's designed for that revisiting of material, for that reminding the students how things work, and to give them some practice. So the idea is to use them towards the end of the course to help build that confidence, to have those reminders. Okay, next steps. Well, more details can be found on the Collins website, and if they haven't done so already, I'm sure one of my colleagues will paste this little web link into the chat for you to be able to access that, find out a little bit more, have a little look inside some of the books there. You can also contact Collins directly for any information about sales and purchasing them for your classes, but I am available now to take any questions that you've got, if there's anything I haven't covered or anything that you want expanding. And I can see the chat box here, so I'll have a little look at what questions have come so far. Is there likely to be an OCR version produced? It's not something that we're working on at the moment. Alex, if there turns out to be great demand, maybe that's something we'll consider. But as I've said, the maths content is the same, so you could probably use either of those and be very well prepared for the OCR examinations. Does the grade 5-6 book highlight to students which content only appears on higher so they can use it if they are working towards the foundation paper? It doesn't do that, Joanne, because what we wanted to do was leave that option open. Quite often with classes, it's very late when you make that decision. Are you going to go higher? Are you going to go foundation? So we've left it more free, so students and teachers using the book can really ascertain what is it the students can do, and if they are accessing what we know is that higher content, we don't want to sort of scare them off by saying this is higher, avoid this kind of thing, then we can make that decision better later in the course for them for that. Okay, and I can see that Collins have indeed put a link to that in. What impact has this approach had on your students? Is that a question for me? So certainly for me, when I've been working with my students on trying to get them to remember and revisit things, the idea of having that more practice is really, really important, rather than just this flying through 200 things at 300 miles an hour towards the very end of the course. The fact that we can look in detail, in depth at something and really revise it, revisit it, practice it, secure it, and then be able to apply it again, working through those fluency and further sections. It's made a big difference on how confident they are in working through the mathematics. Do I have any more questions at the moment, please? Okay, sorry, I've just flicked backwards there on the wrong one. And something's appeared in the Q&A. Let me just have a quick look in there. Is there any overlap between the contents of each book? So if you take something like angles that I showed some examples of earlier on, then there is angles work in each of the books. So in the first book you have the basic rules of angles, and then in the second book you have that review page that I showed you that reminded students about those basic ones, takes you to more complex ones, and then in the third book you've got circle theorems, but you've got that revision, you've got that review section at the front that goes through what you'd expect the students to know from earlier on as well in there. So there's a progression in angles. There's no repeat content. There's no questions that appear in aiming for a 4 that appear in 5, 6 as well. It does do that development, but it does do that revisiting, acknowledging the need for that overlap. Okay, that's so I've answered that one. And something else has appeared in the chat. No, I've answered that one already as well. And now I'm flipping backwards again. Whoops. Sorry, just going back and forward with my buttons. Okay, I think that's it. I don't think we've got any questions at the moment. If there are other questions that occur to you, then obviously do discuss that with your Collins rep in school, and they'll be able to support you with that, or pass anything through to me, and I'll be able to get an answer to you as quickly as possible on that as well. Okay, so I'm going to pass back to Katie now. I've just seen another question in the chat box, Katie. So before I do, I will have a look at that one. What do you think is the biggest challenge for GCSE students for exams next year? Well, that's a very deep question, isn't it? I think that now, at the moment anyway, there's no advanced information like there was last year. So I think that is probably the biggest challenge in realizing, what it is, they need to know how to prepare themselves for each of those 3 papers. And again, what we've tried to do with these revision guides is make sure that students are prepared for calculator and non-calculator papers. We've got specific sections in some of the books on how to use a calculator for this. Some of the double spreads are about that, and then within topics, as I illustrated with the iteration one, again we've got illustrations of where and how they need to use a calculator on that. I think really what, as we always do as teachers, we do mock examinations, we do trials, we find out what they're good at, what they're not good at. And I think, having something that's as clear as this as a revision guide, so you've got clear areas that those students need to work at, you can really point them at the right sections that they need. And for sometimes that will be those review sections, the things at the beginning, you've forgotten the basic stuff because you're concentrating so hard on your 7, 8, 9. So you might want to look at those. But yeah, for us as teachers, I think that the challenge is identifying those gaps, but now we have a really useful resource with plenty of practice, not just 1 or 2 questions that hopefully will help students to be able to rise to the challenge of the exams next year. Okay, so thank you very much for listening. I'll pass back to Katie, who will close off the webinar.
Oh, lovely. Thank you ever so much, Ian. That's been incredibly comprehensive, and I think you've given everyone a really great walkthrough of kind of the reasoning behind the guides, kind of what it's based on, and how they can be used. So thank you very much for that. I hope you've all found it really informative. And just to sign off to say, good luck, everybody. I know, as Ian mentioned, lots of mocks are happening at the moment. If you have any questions, just come to Collins directly or to White Rose as well. Always happy to hear from you. And yeah, just remains to, again, thank Ian for his insights and time, and to wish you all a really good evening. Thank you very much. Bye.